All right. Welcome everyone to today's event, Q&A with artists Elizabeth Brim and Mary Lee who are also artists in our exhibition, It Takes a Village, which is the Metal Museum's first ever crowd-curated exhibition. I'm Brooke Garcia, the Metal Museum's Collections and Exhibitions Manager, and also here today is Dorothy Swadick, the museum's exhibitions coordinator, and of course, Elizabeth and Mary, the reason you're all here. Elizabeth and Mary were the top winners in the Best for Sculpture and Best Art Jewelry section, so they were our number ones for all of the voters in the exhibit. This exhibition presents 25 works of art from the Metal Museum's permanent collection. All artworks in the show were selected by popular vote online and on social media. Inside the gallery, you can see voter comments about the artwork in place of traditional object labels, and also a video component where voters shared their thoughts on recordings in the gallery. The Metal Museum is proud to present our first crowd-curated exhibition, and we are delighted to invite Elizabeth and Mary to speak today. Before we introduce our panelists, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge our supporters. The Metal Museum receives exhibition and programming support through the Wingate Foundation and the Hyde Family Foundation, and operational support through Arts Memphis and the Tennessee Arts Commission. I'm now going to turn it over to Dorothy, who will be introducing Mary and Elizabeth.
Yes, I have the honor today of introducing our two wonderful panelists. I'll start with Elizabeth Brim, who's a blacksmith and educator living in Western North Carolina. She's best known for her feminine imagery in her ironwork. A native of Columbus, Georgia, she graduated with an MFA in printmaking before studying and working with a variety of materials at the Penland School of Crafts. Unexpectedly, after taking many different courses at Penland, she fell in love with iron and helped revive Penland's Iron Studio. In addition to teaching at Penland, Brim has taught at Peters Valley Crafts Center and Haystack School of Crafts. She has also taught workshops all over the country, including at past Society of North American Goldsmiths annual conferences and at the James Renwick Alliance in Washington, D.C. Brim regularly exhibits her work, especially at university museums and galleries. And in 2009, she was selected as the Metal Museum's Master Metalsmith. So thank you for joining us, Elizabeth. And we also have Mary Lee with us today, who is a world-renowned artist who's exhibited work extensively, both internationally and nationally. She's been exhibiting her work since the late 1960s and has received numerous awards and recognitions. A select few of these honors include 3 National Endowment of the Arts Craftsman Fellowships, the 1994 Master Metalsmith at the Metal Museum, Master of Medium and Metals at the Renwick Gallery, and a recipient of the 2008 Irving and Yvonne Twinning-Humer Award for Lifetime Artistic Achievement. Who also has work in major collections such as the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Renwick Gallery, an American Crafts Museum, and the Art Institute of Chicago. And Mary is currently a member of our collections committee here at the Metal Museum. So hi, Mary. Thank you for being here.
Hi, everyone. Very pleased to be here.
Oh, we're so excited for our conversation today. And thank you both for joining us. So I guess without further ado, we'll just jump into our questions. And if any of our viewers today have any questions that come up for Mary or Elizabeth, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll kind of monitor that through the course of today's conversation. Okay, first question. Would you both mind starting off by telling us how you became an artist and what kind of metalwork you make? And maybe we can start with Elizabeth since I introduced you first.
Okay, well, how I became an artist, I think I've kind of always been an artist in a way, and I think it was probably because of the influence of my mother and my grandmother, because they always sewed clothes, specifically frilly dresses for me and my sister. And we would sit on the floor and they would drop scraps of material on the floor as they sewed and made things. And then I would make things out of those scraps. And I think that was the start of me making things. And so they were a big influence, and they were very meticulous craftspeople too. So they're very perfectionist, and I think that's run over into my into my practice. And so obviously when I started blacksmithing, it was the second thing I ever made that I thought was something that wasn't just practice was an apron that was made out of sheet steel. So it was just kind of a natural thing for me to start making things that looked like fabric after that experience with my family. And so instead of using a sewing machine and straight pins, I was using vice grips and torches and welders. And so that's my answer. Is that good?
Perfect. Thank you.
I think that's fascinating. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Well, I'll mention this and I see a bunch of my friends on there, and I know a lot of my friends have seen my slideshow before. And in my slideshow, I show this picture of, or several pictures of me with my birthday cake wearing one of the dresses that my mother and grandmother made. And the dress would always, the frosting would always match the color of the dress. And it was very obsessive. And so I always use those photographs as part of my slideshow to show like my influences of my artwork.
Well, if it's my turn, I think this might be a theme. I come from a long line of mothers and grandmothers and aunts that were artists. My father's sister went to college, Syracuse University, and studied painting, was a painter all her life, and was one of those women that would go out to Taos in the summer and paint. Early on, I have some paintings in the house done by my grandmother and both grandmothers and her grandmother. And so I just never thought of being anything but an artist. Was sent to school in little classes, when I was a kid, for pastel or drawing, watercolor painting. And it wasn't until I was at the ripe old age of 16 that I went to a summer program out at Lawrence, Kansas, the University of Kansas music and art camp for high school kids, that I discovered metalsmithing. I took sculpture and ceramics and drawing and painting and design and thought I had everything I needed, and I had an hour left over, and they said, well, why don't you try metalsmithing? And I thought, well, I don't know what it is, but sure, I've got what I think I need, so why not? Fell in love with it, and so since 16, I've been in love with metals.
I love that. I feel it's my favorite question to ask artists is how you actually came to metalsmithing, because it's always such an interesting thing to discuss. And kind of going off of that, Mary, could you start by telling us if the idea or inspiration behind the piece in the exhibit, which is one of your bracelets, and I'm going to share it for everyone to see on the screen.
So, okay, I can talk even though I'm not on the screen, maybe.
Yes.
Can everyone hear? Okay. So I went to undergraduate school at Cranbrook in metals and graduate school at Carbondale in metals. And when I was learning how to hammer and forge and raise and cast and the whole range of things. I loved metals because I loved the tools, not because I was a little girl and liked jewelry. I was a tomboy, but I loved working with the tool. But I took a fibers course as an elective in graduate school, required elective. And we were learning how to string up the loom and do some weaving. And then at the end of the quarter, we had to do an off loom project. And I chose to work with wire and the interlacing processes rather than with fiber. And I was, combining the two classes. Actually, it was literally because I needed to do work for both classes. And I figured if I did it in metal and did it with fibrous techniques, I could get credit with both classes with one piece, which did work. But that's how I started with the wire work. Now the wire work has been, for me, the ideas are pushing process. I come from the 60s when we were interested in new techniques and processes. And so with most of the work I do, it's, I get an idea and it's, can I do this with my wire work? So for the bracelet, I was doing a bunch of patterning that was woven into the tubes by slinging the weft, which are the little ones that go round and round, up and down and round and round. Slinging them over some of the heavier warp ones to create like a damask pattern. So I was weaving a bunch of patterns, and then I would come back later and make them into a series of bracelets. And this one, I actually traded with Brent Kington and his wife Di for one of his pieces, and they then subsequently donated it to the museum. So I guess that's the idea around it.
Great, well, thank you. And Elizabeth, if you want to go ahead and talk about your piece and exhibit, same question, what was the idea or inspiration behind it?
Well, I've made a lot of pillows over my career, and I have to start way back. So the first piece I ever made that I thought that was not just an exercise was a pair of high heel shoes. And I took those high heel shoes to my very first Abana conference that I went to in Birmingham, Alabama in 1988. And I submitted those high heel shoes into the conference gallery, and they got a lot of attention because they were so different than anything else in that exhibit. So I got a lot of attention at that conference, and I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to be getting this attention, I need to know what I'm doing. So I signed up for a class at Penland with John Medvedev, who we all know as Duff, and because he is very, very he's a very accomplished blacksmith and forger. So I thought I need to know some traditional techniques. You know, I can't just sit back and be the woman who made the high heel shoes and wears the pearls, you know. So I wanted to be somebody that people would respect of my work. So I took the class with Duff, and I studied hard on doing the traditional and learning hammer control and things like that, the things that I knew that I needed to know. But at the end of all that, what I ended up making the class was a tiara. And so after that, I thought, I need a pillow for this tiara to sit on. So the next class I was taken with David Seacrest. And David said, what do you want to make in this class? And I said, I want to make a pillow. And so one night he and Dan Radvin and I were sitting around talking about how to make a pillow. And we thought, what if we just welded two pieces of flat plate together, left a hole in it for a pipe, heated it up and shot compressed air in there. Wonder what would happen. And so we tried it, and it worked beautifully. It was perfect. So I made that pillow. Then again, I started getting a lot of attention for that. But so anyway, that's how the pillows started being made. And I had to sell that tiara to support myself at the Penland School. So I never got to make a pillow for that particular tiara to sit on. But I made a lot of pillows since then. And this particular pillow that is in the collection of the Metal Museum, is the title of it is Excess. And it has on this pillow is all the decorative techniques that I have used for a lot of my pillows. It's got etched lace pattern on the body of it, and then all those little rivets that are supposed to look like covered buttons, and then of course the ruffles, and you can see that there's too much ruffle, and so it's hanging off of the edges, so that's the excess.
I love that. Actually, when people see the pillow, when our visitors are actually here looking at it, they're always like, "That's made of metal," because it does look like you could just lay your head on it. And
Yeah, they look really soft.
Mhm.
While you all were talking, I had a question come in from Mary Lee, who someone was curious if you remember the name of your teacher at Kansas when you were a teen.
An elder moment here.
Put you on the spot, no worries.
The main guy that taught there all the time, the older man that taught in the 50s and 60s. I'm pretty sure it was him because we were in a Quonset hut. It was before they, little Quonset hut out somewhere, not in one of the main buildings. And it was a much older gentleman that was helping me. And I remember I made a bracelet and I was trying to get the little hook and eye bent with wire. And he took 2 pair of pliers, one in each hand, just like his 2 hands. And he grabbed that wire and made the little hook. And I was so impressed, easily impressed in those. But yeah, I hope I remember his name before.
No, you're fine. Is it Carlisle Smith?
Carlisle Smith, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think it was him. Yeah, I really think so, which is great because then I studied with Brent Kington, who was one of Smith's students. And so the family tree just, comes down. Pretty cool.
I love that. I think that's such like an incredible aspect of the metal smithing and metal arts community is people working with other people and being so collaborative.
That's a family.
I actually got another question too while you guys were speaking. Is there a particular artist you may draw inspiration from that may or may not be a metalsmith, but someone that you find inspiring?
Oh, Elizabeth, do you have?
Oh, I find a lot of people inspiring, a lot of artists inspiring, and I know a lot of artists because I live at Penland. So when things are normal, we have hundreds of artists come through here all the time, and so I'm fortunate enough to get to know a bunch of people. But I don't think there's any one artist that influences my choice of what I make. It's just a mishmash of things that I like.
Yeah, when I'm asked that question, I always say there are 2, both metalsmiths. Brent Kington for his focus on work. I mean, I saw that man make every day. There were new waxes because he hadn't switched to blacksmithing when I studied there. Every day there were new waxes on his desk that he would invest and cast that day that he had done at night on his kitchen table. So there was such a drive and a passion for working. And then the other person I spotlight is John Paul Miller. I grew up outside of Cleveland, and I remember going to the art museum every year for the Cleveland May Show and seeing another one of his pieces. It displayed in the museum, and pressing my nose against the vitrine glass, just in awe of his work. And I knew he was alive. I'd never met him until much later, but there was a different piece each year. I knew he was making it that year, and it was just as wonderful as any of the ancient stuff in the museum. And I thought, yes, I, as a person, can aspire to that. I don't have to be dead in order to have good stuff.
Well, and I hope It Takes a Village has really kind of brought that home for both of you as winners of like best in your respective categories. So that's a really fun kind of connection there. All right, so I'll move on to our next question. So this is kind of getting back to some of your process with regard to your specific pieces that we were talking about earlier. So some of it might be a little bit of reiteration, but if you want to add anything else, will you both briefly explain how your piece was made and how the technique supports the idea of the piece, or if there's any relation between those two things at all?
One of us.
Yeah, whoever would like to start.
Well, I've already talked a lot about how my piece was made. It was inflated. It was fabricated and inflated. The ruffles are forged. And I don't think the technique has anything to do with the what it is. It's a pillow over the top decorated. It's just I just used what I knew how to do to make what I wanted to make.
Yeah, no, that's totally valid. There doesn't need to be a relation, but yeah, just curious to know. How about for you, Mary?
Well, I've been pursuing this idea of working with the wire. I've tried all different braiding it, knitting it, whatever, until about 74, I hit on twining, which is a particular kind of basketry, usually basketry, where you have the warps are the big ones and the wefts are the ones that go in and out. Okay, so you're in regular weaving, you've got usually one weft that goes in and out. With twining, you have two, and they're twisting around each other as they go over and under the warps. Minor difference, but it gives a look to the surface that I really liked. And so since 74 until now, I've been in a track, which some may say is a rut, but I've been trying to figure out different things I could do with that. So it was form, it was surface patterning. And about 20 years ago, I thought I had a big breakthrough by just crushing the thing after I wove it and seeing what that would do to the forms. And I guess one of the questions later is what I'm on to now. I'm sort of melting it after I weave it, but which I like because the crushing and the melting, it's a little dangerous because your scrap pile might get a lot bigger suddenly after a lot of work on something, but I like that challenge. And as I said, I've been pursuing this as challenges. I get the idea in my mind, can I do X? I think the wire will do it, but can I do it? Am I good enough yet with my wire work to get that idea done? So the bracelet was pursuing, as I said, pursuing a lot of pattern in the twining on tubes, big, large diameter tubes, smaller diameter tubes. The wire came off, the heavier wire came off of a coil of wire that I'd bought from Rio Grande, not on a little spool. And so when I cut my lengths, they were a little bit bent. So I just went with it and made bent tubes. So then when I was cutting them up later to try to form them into a series of bracelets, whether they were triangular ones, square ones, they each have a little bit of a curve to them. So that's how that curve came. And I really liked that because our bones are curved, your arm is curved. And so I didn't want to do hard geometry next to the organic body form. I don't know, does that make sense?
Yes, it does. We had a question pop up as you were speaking with regard to the wire you were talking about. Is there a form inside of it?
No. It's made like a basket, i.e. the weft, the warp rather, the stiffer, heavier gauge ones are stiff enough that they'll hold their form while I'm putting the weft on them. And so the tubes are hollow. I stick my finger down in the top of it just so that I can hang on to it and go. And the little warps are only about an inch taller. So I'm weaving and weaving and weaving. When I run out of that inch, then I just pull each warp up a little bit because it goes down, right? So I pull it up until there's another inch, and then I weave, and then pretty soon, you know, the bottom comes up and I've got the whole tube woven, if that is understandable.
Yes, thank you. Elizabeth, we also had a question come in for you. Someone would like for you to talk a little bit more about how you add the details before your piece is inflated.
Yeah, that's Brad in Arkansas. And so originally when I first started doing this and I would put ruffles and things on to my pillows, I would inflate them and then I would put the ruffles on afterward, and they're welded on, whether I use a MIG welder or a TIG welder or a torch. I usually use a torch. But anyway, so that's what I was doing originally, but then I would have to fit that ruffle to the edge of the pillow. And then I thought, well, if I put it on before, it'll just all inflate at the same time. And then it's much easier and looks better too. It looks more natural. So I do most of the stuff to the pillow before I inflate it. With the excess piece, when it's inflated, the pillow is like this, a fat thing. And then I heat it back up and take a piece of wood and put it down on those buttons and hit that back down in, so it kind of pooches back in and becomes soft looking. So I do that after it's inflated. And then obviously there's a lot of finishing that goes on after that. Like I sandblast it, and then sometimes I heat it up again so it develops a little bit more scale. And then in the case of the excess, a lot of times I paint my work because I don't want it to rust. And so I paint stuff a lot of times flat black, and then I use some polish that has graphite in it to polish it. And then I put clear satin paint over that it looks just like steel, but it's painted and it's protected. But in the case of this particular one called Excess in the museum, it's got a heat color on it. So it was sandblasted and then burnished and then heated with a torch to bring out all those beautiful temper colors, we call them, the bronzes and blues and things like that. And then it was waxed over that to try to maintain those colors. I hope that explains everything.
No, that's actually great. We had another question come in about your finishing techniques. So you did a 2-for-1. Thank you.
Finishing is super fun, and steel can look like anything, which is a really neat and fun thing about it.
We also had a question come in for both of you. What do each of you do to maintain the strength and dexterity you need in your hands to do your work?
Do your work.
Mary, that was coming in while you were talking about weaving. So do you do anything to strengthen your hands?
Doing a lot of gardening, pulling out roots and stuff, which probably is not good for my arthritis. It was interesting. I met a Chinese goldsmith one time, or metalsmith, and shook hands, and he said, you have no calluses. Are you sure you do your own work? And I said, yeah, but you didn't touch the tips of my fingers. That's where I have the calluses, because it's all handling the wire. So I don't know. I think I'm just very lucky in that at my age, I can still wiggle them. They still work. So, you know, knock on wood, and thank you to the powers that be.
Well, I think if you just keep working, you can keep working. But if you quit, you're going to get all stiff and lose your muscles. And so you gotta keep on working.
Well, we have lots of questions streaming in, but I wanted to skip back to when we had talked, what we've written down, which was, how did you both first get involved with the Metal Museum? And Mary, if you want to start there.
Well, I went to Carbondale for grad school, and when they had a big, and I left in '67, but when they had a big conference in '78, I went back and met Jim Wallace, who organized that conference for them. So then, because he was still in school there. So when he went down to start the museum, he had me come down and jury the very first show called House Jewelry. I don't know, that was in '78. We were trying to figure out what years this all was. And then about the same time, I think at a different time, but about the same year, Jamie Bennett was teaching at Memphis College of Art, and he had a conference for metalsmiths. And I went down for that. So I was seeing Wally several times in succession, and sort of fell in love with the idea that he was trying to build a museum for my field, our field. And I know in a lot of programs, blacksmithing is seen as sort of a different field from hollowware, from jewelry. But in my mind, since I watched Brent go from a jeweler to a blacksmith, it was all one, it's all metals. And so I was going to the blacksmith conferences and the goldsmith conferences. And to me, it was all metal, and I was fascinated by learning more and more about metal. So I've been back to a lot of the repair days over the years just to visit. And so yeah, Metals Museum is close to my heart.
Well, I got associated with the Metal Museum because of everything goes back to Penland School of Crafts, really. So in 1987, Rick Smith and I met in a class that Phil Baldwin was teaching at Penland, and we became friends. And then Rick, we went to our first Abana conference together in 1988. And then Rick was involved with helping build the anniversary gates at the Metal Museum. And he told me I needed to come to repair days at the Metal Museum. So somewhere around that time in 88, 89, I came to repair days for the very first time. And I just loved it. It was so great to meet all the people who were there. And also it gave me a real feeling of power that I could fix these things that were broken. And I learned a lot. And so I was just religiously went to repair days for years and years and years after that. And also then I would go to Forging on the River, and just went to the Metal Museum anytime I could, because it's like homecoming.
Oh, we love that. It's so wonderful. Again, the kind of theme of like this community and the power and connection it has. That's wonderful. We love to hear it.
And Elizabeth, I've gotten a couple of questions now. One, will you be teaching more classes in Penland in general? But someone also asked if you'd be hosting another pillow workshop once it's safe to do so.
Well, I would love to, and I hope I will. I have to have some school probably ask me to do that. And it is super fun to do the inflating classes, because everybody thinks of a different thing to make. And over the years, I've had people inflate like chickens, octopus, a lot of fish. A hot water bottle was was a wild one that this woman made. So it's so fun to do that because everybody thinks of a different thing to make. And so I hope I get to do some more inflating classes, and I'm really excited to start teaching again, because I really miss people.
I think that's been the hardest thing about this past year is missing that interaction. And I know the four of us were talking a bit earlier about at least we can still have these Zoom conversations and have it reach so many more people, but do miss the having you both here. And
Well, I think we've learned a lot during this time doing the Zoom stuff. And I think that the Zoom things get out to more people than can come to an event, say like to our Fire on the Mountain Festival that we have in Spruce Pine every April, which this year is going to be another virtual event. But we're hoping that people will join in through the internet and then maybe make the effort to come in person when it's safe again. So it's all good. We got to look on the bright side.
for sure.
And
And do.
sorry, I was going to say that on that note, that's a really great kind of transition to the next question we wanted to ask you both. The first part of that being, what is some of the new work you're currently working on, but also how has COVID-19 impacted your practice in this past year?
I don't know. I can start because I don't know if I was depressed or what, but I just couldn't think of anything I wanted to do. It didn't seem like it was going to be worth working because I was just going to get it and die. I don't know. I'm not sure what it was, but for a while I was gardening. I wanted to be active. It got me out of the house. Luckily, I have a big yard. I'm so fortunate in that, not in a little apartment. But lately, I have been able to settle down and get to work again, and it feels really good after a break. But COVID, it's like I'm in a little bubble. I have my house, I have my yard, and I don't go any further than at the top of the driveway to the mailbox and the garbage can. And I order my groceries online, and I do not go. I don't want to go. I went to get my first test last week of my first shot. So I did venture out to a hospital to get that. But COVID, I'm a little bit of a hermit anyway. And so I don't think it has been as bad mentally for me as it has been for a lot of other folks. I know I'm trying to donate as much as I can to organizations that are in support of artists who are not as fortunate as I. I'm retired. I have my retirement income, and that is still coming in. I'm not making my living by selling at fairs, which aren't, selling at galleries, which are closed, doing workshops that aren't. And so I really do feel for my colleagues in the field who are really having a rough time here. And so I've been making that mission to try to do what I can for them in this time.
Well, it's really bummed me out. I am not a hermit. I spend a lot of time up at the Penland School hanging out with all those fun, creative people that I meet. And so it's been rough, but I'm surviving. And I've been cooking a lot because I have to eat, and I've always been interested in cooking. So I've decided to try to build my skills during this time. And I have some ideas of new things that I want to make. I have some commissions that I need to finish. And I have And I have people who've asked me to make things for them, and I tell them I can't make a commitment until I know that I can get all this other stuff finished. So I'm looking forward to things getting better real soon. When spring happens and the flowers start coming up and daffodils and leaves come back on the trees and it'll warm up and we can all get outside. Even if we have to stay outside, at least we can be outside together. In the fall, it was people would come over here and we would hang out in my yard and, you know, visit and stuff. And then it got so cold. So that's been a real bad time. So I'm optimistic.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful just to hear how people in general are kind of coping, whether it's turning to gardening, cooking, kind of taking a break from your work or becoming really invested in it. So thank you both for sharing that. Mary, as you were speaking, we had a question come in that you kind of touched on, but someone is curious to know how you all think COVID might affect the art market in general.
Well, let's see. I have one email news thing that comes in about the major art auctions, and they seem to be doing pretty well. The major paintings are still getting millions of dollars, and they're getting more than their estimates. Our economy is sort of split, and so a lot of us are having trouble. But then a lot of people are doing quite well, thank you, and they're still spending money. I've been selling some things through galleries, and they're selling them online. They must, because I think the galleries aren't really open except for maybe an appointment basis. I don't know how it's. I don't know how it's going to affect it in the future. People are. They were, young folks were looking at it toward experience instead of things. And now that they're home, things are a little more important to them because they can't go out and have those experiences like cruises. And so there's, as I've read, there's excess money for those who have money that aren't taking cruises and aren't going on vacations. And so they are spending a little more money fixing up their house. And so in some cases, craftsmen are involved in that. And so that's going to be good. So I'm not an economist.
Right. No, thank you for your reactions, though. We appreciate it. Elizabeth, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I was just thinking, you know, I live here at Penland. I live across the street from the post office. And from what I hear at the post office, a lot of the craftspeople who live around here are sending out stuff daily. You know, they're getting orders for stuff over Etsy or Instagram or whatever, and a lot of people are sending stuff out all the time. And so I think that's good, and I think that's true. But Mary said people are staying home and they want to make their place more theirs and the way they want it to be. So they're maybe buying stuff, and it's real different. But I do know that my friends who make small affordable stuff are selling like crazy.
A lot more online shopping going on right now.
Yeah.
We got a question in the chat that kind of leads into our next question that we talked about. Our question we got was when, where, and how did you start selling your work? And I think that might tie into, do you guys have any advice for artists just kind of beginning your careers? Elizabeth, if you want to start with that. I know those are big ideas. But.
Well, if it's okay, I have a story about how I started selling my work. I started blacksmithing at Penland, and then for some wonderful reason, the director at the time, well, the iron program was tiny at the time. There were only 2 classes in the iron studio in the summer, and the rest of the time that studio sat empty, which meant that if I was around, I could use it by myself. So I had this private studio, and I didn't have much experience, but I was making stuff and playing around. And Marvin Jensen, who's my mentor, was he would encourage me and tell me how to do stuff, and then he'd go leave me and he'd go, okay, be careful up here now. And so then at one point I was told to get the paint these windows on this old building, and also get a screen door that was new and paint that screen door and put the screen door up on this building, which looked like a little shack. And it was where all the studio assistants were kept in the summertime at Penland. So I was painting that, and I was gonna put that screen door up, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be funny if this screen door handle looked like a snake? So it looked like a snake was crawling up the side of this shack, and people could see it from the road and think that was a snake. So I made a snake door handle to put on that door. And then I put it on there, and then people started seeing it, and people would say, oh, I like that. Can I trade you something? Will you make me one? And people would say, can I buy one from you? And I thought, dang, people will give you money for this, and this is so fun. So that is how I started realizing that I could sell my work. And so I started making those snakes and selling snakes, and I still make snakes and sell them in galleries. And so that is how I first started things. But my advice to anybody who's wanting to start out and become a full-time craftsman, with your livelihood depending on it, is you better make sure you really love what you're doing, because you're going to have to do it a lot, and you're going to have to work really hard, a whole lot harder than if you just have a regular job where you have a paycheck and you have benefits and you have all these other good things that go along with that. So just make sure you really enjoy what you're doing and find your real passion, because I really believe that if you make something, and when you are having a really great time and you make the thing, and the joy that you feel as you're working on it shows and shines through that piece, and then people see it and they can intuit the joy that you felt while you're making that piece, and they want to have it and they want to live with it. So that's my advice to to people getting started.
Well, to go along with what Elizabeth was saying, I used to tell students, you need to learn about yourself. And as I said, I'm a little bit of a hermit. And so I knew I would not do well trying to sell my work directly through like craft fairs, because I'd have to talk to all the people and I'd have to say, oh, it looks lovely on you, dear, whether it does or not. And I just couldn't do that. So I've pretty much always sold through galleries. And I remember when I was getting out of school and I was talking to Brent, my teacher, and I was saying, well, I don't know where I'm going to end up. And I guess, I have to go to New York and be a starving artist. And he says, oh, Mary, with jewelry, you can live anywhere you want as long as there's a post office. Just send it out. And so that was really good advice. And I let the galleries earn their half, because they talk to the wealthy people that are very intimidating to me and that I could never talk to. And it's worked out pretty well, because I have had a paycheck with benefits and for a long time because I was a teacher, but I also had a company. I file taxes, and my company has made a profit for every single year except one since I started it back in the 70s. So I feel very, I I was very committed toward making, but also making it a business. And so when I retired from teaching, I only retired from one of my 2 jobs. Now I have my other job, which is my passion.
Well, both of you shared such great advice with us, so thank you very much. And thinking of both of you having work that's being bought and loved, we're very proud to have pieces of your work in our permanent collection. So I just wanted to ask, what does it mean for you both to have a piece of your work in our permanent collection?
I'll go first. My piece in the Metal Museum was the first piece of my work that was collected as a piece in a permanent collection of a museum. And I think that it really becomes like a magnet, because ever since that piece, then a lot of other museums have wanted to collect my work, which is really great. And it kind of, I think as a blacksmith, when you decide you're going to become a blacksmith, the first thing you need is an anvil. And people always say, where can I get an anvil? I need an anvil. It's kind of hard to find, but I think once you get an anvil as a blacksmith, you kind of become a magnet, and anvils kind of come to you so you can help other people acquire what they need. And I kind of feel like being in a museum collection does the same thing for people's work. But maybe it's just kind of a validation.
Well, let's see. Maybe to put it more broadly, what does having your work in a museum mean? For a jeweler, it means that that piece of jewelry is no longer a piece of jewelry, because it will never be worn again. It will never be touched by human hands, but only cotton gloves. So that's a little bit of a pull, because what I say I want to happen for my work is that it finds, well, I make it because I'm playing this game. Can I make it? And I'm having a lot of fun making it. But then I put it out in the world, and I want to make sure, I want to hope that it can find an owner, and that that person will wear it, that it will be a functioning piece of jewelry. And what jewelry can do, and I've seen this happen in my family history, if the person really loves it and wears it a lot, it can sort of become identified with that person. I know I have a piece of Victorian machine-made necklace, piece of jewelry that I always saw my grandmother wear every time we went and visit her in another state, which is once or twice a year only. So that necklace meant my grandmother to me. Well, after she died, we were clearing out her house. We found a picture in her attic of her aunt who was wearing that necklace. Well, my mother inherited it and I inherited it. That necklace tells me where I come from, sort of. And I think tool handles can do that. Handles from rocking chairs, other crafted pieces that are intimately associated with a person can almost bring that person, it means that person to someone else. Well, a museum piece is never going to do that. And so I feel very lucky in my career that I've got some pieces in a museum, grew up in an art school, was educated in an art school, and it seems like we're taught that to be a famous artist, you want your work in museums. Well, that luckily has happened to me on a number of cases, and it's great. That feeds that side of me. But that other side of me that really wants my work to become associated with people, I was thrilled when I had a major show a few years ago, and one of my owners would not loan her piece back because she wore it every day and she did not want to be without it. I went, yes, it happened. So, yeah, I love having it in the metal museum. I like the fact that some of my, well, it's great. Some of my work is in big, huge museums. That's very nice. The fact that it's in the metal museum is good because they will show it and they will lend it. It is not going to be relegated to the basement. So if any of you older craftsmen out there are looking for places for your work, think about the smaller museums, because they then will, it will always be on, or very frequently be on view. More people will see it, and it will then be loaned out. More people will see it then. So it will represent you better, I think.
That's good advice, Mary.
Yeah, thank you both for those answers. I love the kind of themes of magnetism, but also kind of the tension of being a part of a museum's permanent collection and what that means for you and your work. That's very fascinating. So that kind of concludes the questions that we had thought of for you all, but I know we've had a bunch of questions trickling in. So I might start chipping away at some of those if that works for everybody. Mary, we got a ton of questions in all about your process, your weaving process, and how your work is made. I think a lot of folks are interested in, first off, why gold? Why use that as a material?
Yes. Well, I started out in silver because that's what I could afford. I look at a lot of old work in the museums, the ancient work. When my work shifted from the more organic flowing things to a tighter torque thing in the late 70s, it was the same time, I made the shift because I had seen the Scythian gold, Thracian gold, Irish gold shows, and those gold torques were what I just fell in love with. And so I was making silver torques. And I thought, well, they really should be in gold, but that's really expensive. So I saved up and saved up and saved up until at one point, a gallery I was dealing with challenged their people to make pieces for the Metropolitan Opera Guild's 50th Golden Jubilee anniversary. So the piece had to be in gold. So I said, okay, now's the time that I've got to do it. I've got to try it out. So I, bit the bullet and ordered 10 ounces of gold. Luckily, it wasn't the price it is now. And made the first gold torque, which then was received very well. It sold relatively quickly for one of my things, for more money than I lived on the year I made it. And I went, holy moly, I can both work in the material that I think my work should be in because of where my influences were and what I want happen to it. And I can actually sell it easier than the silver pieces. So that makes sense. And I love working with it. It's easier to work with, easier to solder because the heat doesn't conduct so fast, actually. So you can spot solder much easier. So I guess I'm working with gold because I just love working with it.
Awesome. And while you were speaking, someone was curious if you could tell us a little bit about what a torque is.
Torque, or TORC, is the Celts often wore them, Celtic men, into battle. One story goes they would wear their torque and nothing else. But it is a tight neck ring, often made to look like a rope. So it twists as it goes. Many of them are made up from twisted wire. And if you've been to the British Museum or the several Irish things, they are gorgeous pieces of work. Huge, heavy, bold statements with great craftsmanship and design. So I just, why do you fall in love? I fell in love with torques. And I'm in love with gold. And I love looking at the gold, and it's almost like you can see down into it. I remember talking to my brother one time, who was an electrical engineer, and he said, oh, actually, you're seeing a physical fact that all of your light does not reflect off the top surface of the gold. Some goes down into it, several molecules or whatever, and then reflects back out, which is why you can have one-way mirrors with gold. Okay, some light comes through, some light doesn't. And he said, interesting, I've never heard anyone say they could see that phenomenon. I went, okay, I didn't know what happened. I just know that I seem to fall into it when I'm looking at it. The higher carat, that'll happen with, not so much 14 or 10. I got off on a tangent.
Oh,
Sorry.
no, I think that's exactly what people wanted to hear. So thank you.
That's fine.
I've been doing this since I was 16 and I still do love it. I read about it all the time. These are all jewelry books.
Yes, Mary, we've had a lot of questions come in wanting to know about your library that is behind you.
Yeah, well, I haven't counted lately. It's somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 books, and they're almost all jewelry or anthropological studies of different tribal peoples and their costuming and how the jewelry relates. And I sit every morning with my coffee and read in my little nook here. And I'm still ordering. Amazon is doing very well by me. I'm bringing books every month, just about. So they're in every room in the house. So except the room. So I don't know what you want to know about it. I taught a course in body adornment the last 10 years I taught at the university. I started reading the books and getting more and more interested in it and going to the library and taking out as many books as I could carry home. And since I was a professor, they let me have them for the whole school year. And so I just had books stacking up in my living room. And when I read them, I like to organize. And so I categorized them in different stacks, and those different stacks sort of became chapters in my course, lectures in my course, when I actually put it together. So I wish our students knew more about the history of their field. I was an advocate for teaching metals and jewelry history. I don't know how much. It's done a little more now than it was 20 years ago, but I think we need more of that. And I think we'd actually be better respected vis-a-vis the arts if art historians knew about our field. They just don't study it. And so when they become curators and directors of museums or teachers of painting and sculpture in schools, then they sort of say it's not important, because if they don't know about it, it must not be important. I better get off my soapbox.
We're fine. Thank you for sharing that, Mary. And I'll just note too, on the topic of like teaching and education, Elizabeth, we've had quite a few comments come through saying how wonderful of an instructor you are. So
That's so nice.
shout outs that way. All right. Oh, another question just came in for Elizabeth. With your background in fabric processes, have you ever tried to incorporate stitchery with wire to create a surface texture?
Well, I stamped stitches onto my pillows to look like stitches. And then one time I had an accident on the back of one of the things where I signed it with a patch, and I was brazing actually the patch onto the pillow, and I accidentally burned through it. So then I made a patch to put the thing on, and then I drilled little holes and made faux stitches, and then brazed that over the hole that I had burned in the piece. So yeah, I'm just all the time playing around with stuff. And I recently have gotten a TIG welder so that I can start playing around with stainless steel. And I have some ideas of things I want to do with that. one of the last things I made was a stainless steel apron, and I had this mesh stuff that somebody had given me, and so I stamped flower patterns into that, and then you know how you get the heat colors when you heat stainless steel. So then I took a hot piece of steel and I just touched the top of the embossing, which gave it the heat color on the silver of the stainless steel. So I'm fascinated with that technique. I can't, I'm real excited to get back and work on that some more. And I have some really hair fine stainless steel wire I'm excited to work with all that stuff. So, and stitching is part of my plan for the next thing I want to work on. So I guess stay tuned.
Awesome, thank you. Speaking of process, Mary, we got a few questions just trying to learn more about kind of your weaving and twining process. And in particular, if you know of any videos of yourself that are out there where people could kind of see the process happen.
Well, I know that when I give workshops, several places have videoed it. But I don't know how. I'd have to think about where. I think, I don't know. I gave a workshop at Creative Side, and I've given workshops down in Texas, which unfortunately isn't quite anymore. And I gave for the Dallas Society of Crafts. I'd have to think about. I don't know if I don't have any.
That's okay.
Yeah,
No,
but I know they're out there somewhere. I just don't know where.
No, that's okay. There's some leads, some places to look. But would you mind speaking some about the process of twining and weaving and how the material is twisted? I know you spoke a little bit about that earlier, but we've gotten a few questions asking for more.
Oh, I should have brought, darn it, I should have brought a piece of string out here so that I could give my regular demo. Gosh, Elizabeth, can you tell another little story, and then I'll go get that string, and then I can show them exactly the difference.
Okay. Let me think of what kind of story I want to tell.
Or we did have a question come in for you, Elizabeth. Someone's curious about the time you spent with Anthony Bourdain.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was wonderful. So that all happened because, why did that happen? I don't know. I got invited to go and on this tour with the Balvenie Scotch Distillery people. Oh, I was nominated for an award. Anyway, it's a long story. I'll tell you sometime, but I had a wonderful time, and I ended up going around with the Balvenie Scotch Distillery people for 3 months, and I would come home and then we would go off again, and I got to hang out with Tony, and he was just the most wonderful person. I never would have thought he would not be with us anymore. So I really feel very fortunate, and I'll always have that video that was made by the Balvenie, and my students at Penland were in that video. It's really cool. Mm-hmm. So I see Mary's back with her string.
Oh yeah, thank you for sharing, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Okay, so with weaving, you've got a warp, which is what is strung up on the loom, and then you've got a weft, which you go over and under with. And so you would go over one, under one, over one, under one would be a typical kind of weaving. So, okay, if you can see it, I don't know. Well, with twining, so the difference between weaving and twining, you've got a weft, warp, and you've got a weft. But with twining, you've got 2 wefts, and one is going to go over one, under one. Then the next one is going to go over one and under the next one. Over one under the next one. If that makes sense. Over one under the next one. Which then, if I pull it off my fingers, you can see that it is twisted. So you're actually twisting these two pieces around each other as they go over and under the warps. So the difference between twining and weaving. So since I'm not using a loom, you can of course twine on a loom, but baskets are a non-loom thing. Baskets are a three-dimensional thing. So I never really took my inspiration from loom weaving, but more from basketry because I wanted to make objects three-dimensional. I have my warp out of a thicker, stiffer material. So sterling silver that's hardened, or 18 karat gold that's pulled down and hard. And then I have my weft out of a thinner and more flexible material so that I can pull down, get it nice and tight, do another one and pull it down and pack it down so that these are not moving all over the place. These are going to be stiff and this and thick, and this is going to be thinner. And so, okay. So thus I was using fine silver and sterling silver when I worked in silver, and now I'm using 18 and 22 karat gold. So you want one heavy alloy that is stiffer just from the alloy, and then I push that by drawing that one down and leaving it hard, draw the other one down but anneal it out of the higher karat softer material. Does that answer that question? I don't know what more people want.
Yes, no, the visual was really helpful. Thank you for finding some string to walk us through that. Just as you were mentioning annealing, someone asked how frequently you anneal during that process.
Well, I can go from an ingot to 30 gauge, 22 karat, and only have to anneal 3 times when I'm pulling down my wire. When I'm twining it, I really don't have to anneal. I start the weft, 22 karat, 30 gauge material, is annealed before I start. After I start, pull it down, I anneal it. So now when I'm weaving, twining, I'm only bending it when I'm putting it into place. So it's not getting work hardened. So the stuff in the little spool or in the hank, the coil is still nice and soft. I will anneal it when I'm all done with making it, but that's also annealing my 18 karat warp. So that would not be as stiff. So I don't want to anneal halfway through. Now, if I make a mistake and I have to untwine, then I frequently anneal that little section before I put it back in. And yes, I make lots of mistakes. So
That's
yeah,
great.
annealing is, yeah. And one tip, if you're trying to anneal 28, 30 gauge fine silver, it's not going to get black. It's going to be reflective. If you don't have a real dark room, it's going to be very hard to see the piece growing orange, which is when we were in school, we were taught white until there's the dull cherry red, and then it's annealed. So what I do is look at the color of the flame of the torch. I'm using a acetylene air torch. It's a blue flame, and as soon as it passes over a piece of metal that is at the annealing temperature, it turns orange. When it passes over cold metal, it's still blue. And so you leave it on until you see that orange second part of the flame, and you know your piece is annealed, whether you see the dull cherry red or not.
Gotcha. Thank you for the tip included in your answer. While you were speaking, Elizabeth, a question came up for you. Have you ever used or thought about using pattern welding to emphasize the fabric-like pattern in your pieces?
Pattern welding, like Damascus steel kind of stuff.
Oh, for the individual who asked that question, if you wouldn't mind sending a follow-up for us, that would be great. We can find out.
One thing I did do a long time ago that I thought was really neat, and I put up on the 8x10, say, piece of 1/8 inch thick steel. I would take 1/8 inch thick pieces of 1/2 or 3/4 and then lay them up in a pattern to look like it was woven or something. I call these plaid. And so I would have this big piece with these flat stock tacked to the piece of sheet steel. And then I would heat that up in a big gas forge and with a power hammer, forge wheel that to the surface. And it looked really cool because where it overlapped like this, you know, it would squish out a little bit more. So I'd call those plaid pillows. And I made a bunch of those for a little bit. Some of them I made that are pretty dang big, but that was hard work. But I have not done a lot of Damascus steel. There's some incredible people working with Damascus steel, and I just let them keep that keep that technique to themselves, and I'll do my stuff. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. We've received 2 questions that kind of touch on what might inspire you all in your work. Mary, someone was hoping that you would speak a little bit more about your international travels in your art career and how those travels might have influenced you.
Well, let's see. I've traveled mostly to Asia, a few times over to Europe. But when I think about influences, I looked at the slides I took when I lived in Taiwan for 2 years, 71 to 73. And there were a lot of the curvilinear lines of the rice paddies as they go down the mountainside. There were the hanging lines of the banyan trees, the air roots. And all kinds of patterning in the temples of intricate carving and the scales on the dragons and all the little wonderful window lattice work that they have. Okay, lots of patterning around. And then I thought, well, am I doing my 75 series had a lot of curved lines to it. Was that influenced by seeing the rice paddies? Or did I take a picture of the rice paddies because I already like curved lines? And I think it was more the latter. I think one is pretty much born with a design sense. Because I know I was the one on the street that could untangle the kite string because my eye followed the line. And I was the one that could find four-leaf clovers all over the place because they're a Y in a sea of X's. My eye sees line and pattern. So all of the traveling, when I go to museums, I was, the national museums would have their national costumes, would have the national jewelry. I was thrilled to learn all that. It was stuff I didn't know anything about because I hadn't studied jewelry history. And it got me really excited about learning more about jewelry history, but how much of it actually affected my jewelry, I'm not sure. The torques, yes, that was definitely. But other than that, I think it's more, you take a lot in and it gestates for weeks, months, years, and then what you have in there to pull out, to put together with other things to make your own designs. I think it's hard to point to one thing that's going to be an influence. But yeah, I've traveled to Asia. I've taken 2 research trips to Guizhou, China, to research how metalsmiths, jewelers, and embroiderers. I bought every single book on the Miao minority tribes that I could find in China. I didn't care what language it was written in, whether I could read the pictures. And so I've got like 10 feet of bookshelf space here dedicated to that kind of stuff, which I didn't have to read. I just look at pictures. But my work doesn't look anything like that. I think you can have a passion and an interest and not make it yourself. I mean, I make my work, they make theirs. So I don't know, I'm rambling.
No, that's really interesting, thinking of where maybe the difference between like inspiration and influence and just how we all process everything that we see every day. Thank you for that.
Yeah, well, when I was little and learning how to write, I'd write the big M for Mary. And then I'd sort of take my pencil and trace around those humps until I got to the edge of the page. I remember doing that in grade school. Well, that's the same design sense as the lines coming down the mountainside with the rice paddies. So that's why I'm saying I think what you're attracted to in design and patterning and line, possibly color. I know I'm not attracted to color much at all. I don't work in color. I failed my color sample things in basic design. You have a propensity for some things more than others. And that's, again, what I would tell my students. You've got to look within yourself. What are your strengths? As Elizabeth was saying, how hard do you want to work? If you want to go skiing every weekend, well, maybe you better be an employee. I remember saying that to people. So yay, Elizabeth. So yeah, how much patience do you have? It goes along with how good is your eyesight. Luckily, we have help for that these days with loops and all. But and what is your how much patience, and then how precise do you want your things? How hard do you want to work? I'm being a little not so nice here maybe, but I used to say, look, because I had beginning students all the time, I said, if you don't have the patience, if you just want 2 things to stick together, go down to ceramics, it does. If you just take 2 rods and press them together, we have to go through a lot of steps in order to get 2 pieces to stick together. So you know yourself, know what you want, and from what field, what art form, what media within, and then within metals, big and strong and blacksmithing, or diddly like I do. So.
I love that. Thank you. Elizabeth, someone was curious if or how often fairy tales and kind of folklore might play into the work that you do, or if it does at all.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Those first steel high heel shoes that I made, I was talking about in 1988, were a direct reaction to the fairy tale of the 12 dancing princesses, where these princesses, the 12 princesses, would get out of the castle every night and dance their shoes into tatters. And so the king finally decided to put this guy on their trail who could become invisible, and he followed them down to where they were dancing and turned them in. So of course he got to marry whichever princess that he wanted. And I thought, damn it. I thought, well, if I made steel dancing shoes for those princesses, they could dance forever. They could party forever. And so, and I do love fairy tales. I love like the dresses from the fairy tales. There's a scene in the movie of Cinderella where the mice and the birds are dropping ribbons and lace and stuff on top of Cinderella to make her this magnificent dress. And I just love that. And So, because I like ribbons and lace, and I like making ribbons and lace, and I made a park bench one time that was a public art thing that had a big bustle in the back of it, so it looks like a big Cinderella skirt, but it's got a bustle in the back. Anyway, yeah, so I like fairy tales, and I like fairy tale dresses, and has a lot. Pretend and making the world the way that I want it to be in my imagination is what I do in my work.
That's wonderful. I love that. I also just want to say that's probably the best dressed park bench ever in the world. That's wonderful.
Well, it's in Spartanburg, South Carolina, if you ever get to go there.
I'll be on the lookout for it. I think that was all of the questions I caught coming in, but maybe we'll use this as an opportunity if anyone else has any lingering questions or things that you sent that I missed or we didn't get to. We'll let folks have a moment to drop those in the chat. But this has been really fascinating, Mary and Elizabeth. I've had a lot of fun chatting with you all.
I've enjoyed it.
Thank you, Metal Museum. This is just great to have. We were talking earlier, to have these things go on from different museums that, you know, it's hard to get to maybe once every few years. They're across the country. So this is just wonderful.
And with that, oh, go ahead, Brooke.
No,
I'm
I was
sorry.
just gonna jump off of that and say thank you so much, both Mary and Elizabeth, for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it so much.
Fun. I learned lots about Elizabeth. Hey.
And everyone's giving you both a lot of love in the chat right now. And
That's wonderful. I feel so special.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think I might have just caught one more question and then we can kind of wrap up our time together today. It's for Elizabeth. Have you attempted enamel with your steel pieces?
I did. But I never really used it for anything, but I enameled a piece, just an experiment in the coal forge. So I got a piece of steel and I sandblasted it and I sprinkled some enamel on it, and then I put it into the coal forge and heated it until that enamel flowed. And then I took some of the coal dust and I kind of sprinkled it in there because I wanted it to look kind of gnarly. And I had an idea that I was going to make some bone looking pieces and enamel them and put some crud on them to make them look interesting. But I haven't gotten around to that yet. Maybe sometime before too long.
Thank you. I think that's, oh, did we have one more come in? The chat is just full of like a lot of thank yous and love for you both. Elizabeth, even though it's not your style, would you consider making a firefighter's helmet if someone commissioned it? Smiley face.
I'd probably think about it for a little bit, but I know myself, and I know that if I'm not into it, I won't do it. So I would probably say no.
Fair enough. Definitely an on the spot question. Thank you.
I don't know if that person is thinking about commissioning somebody to make a firefighter's helmet. Maybe I could think of a friend of mine who might want to do it if they want to commission a firefighter's helmet. But it just my own personal self. I have to feel a connection with the thing. I'm not a manufacturer, in other words. I'm just an artist who makes things that entertain me. So
that's great. I think that was all of the questions we had for you all today. So thank you all so much for joining us, and a special thanks to Elizabeth and Mary for sharing their time and talent with us today. And I've dropped a link in the chat. If you want to see more of It Takes a Village, you can learn more there. In addition, we'll be having another kind of Q&A style webinar with some other winners from It Takes a Village in the next month. So be on the lookout for that as well. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.